Hey everybody, this is Cation. I figure I'd give a small rundown of my deck list since I've been changing it quite a bit. Maybe a few weeks ago, pre Vancouver, I was actually running a non-baited hook version because I just thought that it was strong enough and I had some pretty good tech in there, such as running Echo, that could really make it work. But truthfully, I think it is still really strong. It just requires you to think so much that I felt as though I was the numerical deck just taking forever at every turn, and that just felt really bad. And it ended up making it so that I had like 2 or 3 ties over the course of the weekend. And so I went to the dark side and decided to make a baited hook deck. So this is going to be what it looks like right now. Let's start simple. On my ruin spread, right now I am running 4 blues and 8 yellows. The reason for this split is because, as you know, the vast majority of the units that are in a LeBlanc deck require power, minus the things like the birds, Black Rose Dignitary, and some of your other pump spells like Watchful Sentry. And so this split makes it so that if you happen to hit a Thousand Tail Watcher, you likely still have the ability to accelerate it. If we need to generate units off of Rift Herald dying, then there's also still some availability in Yellow Ruins to be able to do so. I found this probably to be the best split. I probably would not recommend going 5/7, especially since this deck doesn't have that many ambiguous power costs like Hidden Blade. There's a few of those, but yeah, you don't get to usually decide which color rune you get to use. Outside of that, let's go into the deck a little bit. So for my 2 and 3 drops in the main, what I ended up doing is I have Watchful Sentries, a Plundering Poro, which I'll explain later. Where's the rest? 3 birds, 3 sentries, and where's the last one? Where is my last one? Oh, and then 1 Black Rose Dignitary in the main. I think most decks would tell you that you should be running 3 of each and then just cut a 2 cost from your deck. What I did find is that there's a lot of turns where my turn 1 play is non-existent, especially when I'm going first. And that in itself was still really winnable for most games. But it just makes it really hard. It feels like you're playing from behind the entire time. And so I decided to add 1 Plundering Poro into the deck. Specifically, I think Plundering Poro, it's up for contention whether or not people play Honest Broker or Plundering Poro, right? In my opinion, Plundering Poro, what it will do most of the time is you can conquer and immediately generate a gold. And on Windswept Hellic, if you're greedy enough, you can make a clone of it and gank over, and then also get 2 gold immediately. Honest Broker is kind of beholden to whether or not your opponent decides to kill the Honest Broker in time. And on top of that, the value is basically the same unless you happen to have a card this in your base. And I feel like all those things considered, it's kind of hard to line everything up. So that's why I'm running Plundering Poros instead. In terms of my usual package, we're running 3 Karthuses, obviously, because these cards are kind of the linchpin of your deck. And then we run 3 Glass Mixologists and 3 Buys. And I feel like that's pretty standard these days. There's definitely a few tricks that you can think of, where if you need a larger might unit and you happen to be able to afford Glass Mixologist exactly, it might be worthwhile for you to actually discard a Karthus knowing that you can bring it back in. That is like one of the nuances of this deck. In terms of units, I'm playing Ruin Rex, 3 copies. Where's the third one? Probably should have sorted it beforehand. And then I have 3 Harness Dragons. I have 2 Rift Heralds and 2 Thousand Tail. And so what I found is that, especially with the more recent deck lists, that running 3 Rift Heralds, usually the first card that I will always cut is a Rift Herald in place of a Thousand Tailed or second one. And so instead of just like making this hard on myself on game 1, I just got to the place where for most matchups I only wanted 2 of each anyways. This makes it so that our ramp is relatively good, where we have 6 5-drops that can hook into 5 6-drops, which can hook into 4 7-drops. So your ramp for Baited Hook is still really solid. The accelerate on the Thousand Tail Watcher is also really nice. So, for example, if you run your Rift Herald in on your turn, it just magically dies for whatever reason, and you bring back a Thousand Tail from your hand. You can actually choose to pay the accelerate and then swing back in. Other nifty things you can do is like maybe you can hook a Thousand Tail in and immediately it will cause your opponent to go down -3 might. In which case, a lot of the like medium-sized units can probably run through the fight at that point. And so outside of that, let's organize this a little bit. I am also running a few spells and a few tricks. Right, just like that. So in order to make room for one Death Grip, which is purely there as a fourth way to sacrifice, especially against purple decks, it means that I have cut my Mirror Images down to 2. Mirror Images is definitely a really strong card, but there are also certain matchups where Mirror Images nearly useless. Like a good example is Master Yi. One of their endgame cards is Ruin Runner, and you're not going to be cloning that much. A lot of times I found it the most favorable thing for me to be doing is actually mirror imaging my own units. But for 3 energy, 2 cost, it's kind of crazy, right? And so I decided to cut one and put one on the side, strictly for the Dazzling Aurora, matchup, where I can try to clone their Elder Dragon to make something happen. From here, 3 sacrifice is always a staple. If folks don't know, 3 sacrifice will always guarantee that your unit dies. And most of the time, that's more important for us than to do the draw 2 and channel 1. So if your opponent tries to defy it, you're kind of cool with it, because that most likely means that you get a few of your Rune Rex procs off, you get your Glass Claw off, you get your Rift Herald off, etc. And then the last bit here is 2 Hidden Blades. I think this is really strong against decks that we're going to draw anyways when they win combat or conquer. On top of that, in a pinch, if you had this hidden or maybe just had it in hand and something's about to go down in another battlefield, you can actually Hidden Blade your Rune Rex and attempt to proc the Death Knell a few times to kind of clear out their base from that combat. And then last but not least, the most obvious one is 3 copies of Baited Hook. Outside of that, let me show you what my sideboard looks like. It's going to look kind of crazy, but hear me out, okay? So I think the most obvious issue is that our 3 battlefields are pretty stable, right? They're pretty much non-negotiables, which is Starspring, Windswept Hillock, and Aspirant's Climb. And what I have found is that while I am playing Aspirant's Climb, that if I don't hit my 2 drops, I have basically set my opponent up to succeed over myself. And so what I have done is, even though I have 7 2-drops in my main base now, I have an 8th Plundering Poro in order to reduce my chances of missing a turn 1 play. I put a Black Rose Dignitary in my side. It's a little bit flexible. I'll tell you which one I took out later. Mainly because I actually think the name of the game for LeBlanc has nothing to do with whether or not you can hold or even score massive amounts of games in the beginning. The whole game plan, in my eyes, is that you're just trying to ramp up as fast as possible, which opens up a lot of different options, right? You can more freely Baited Hook at any time you want. If you happen to have a big unit in your hand, you can just play it raw, stuff like that. The Mirror Image is usually only played when I'm playing against Dazzling Aurora. I don't necessarily always have to clone them 3 times, but to have 3 copies, your likelihood of seeing it at the time that you need is very important. One thing to note, though, it depends on how fast you think you can get stuff like Rift Herald and Baited Hook procs to go off to recycle your deck. A lot of times, if you see 1 copy of Mirror Image in your mulligan, I would say this is a high target to mulligan to the bottom. 2 reasons. 1, you don't need it exactly in the beginning. And 2, if your opponent happens to sabotage you, then they're kind of shit out of luck and not being able to sabotage a key card. They'll just get to see like a bunch of units in your hand, and then they'll feel like, okay, whatever. And so the hope is that it's not showing up in your turn 1 plays, maybe not even up to like turn 3 or 4. And around that time, maybe one of the other 2 copies will show up. And if not, maybe through Baited Hook and through Rift Herald recycling, you'll actually get the bottom of your deck back to the top. Blue LeBlanc is pretty obvious. Every time you're going first, you're switching to Blue LeBlanc. There are a few nuanced situations where you might even keep Blue LeBlanc in for game 3 when you're not going first. It really depends on the matchup. Sometimes you really just want to hold to infinite and just win that way. But those cases haven't come up to me enough for me to feel confident to do this. And then here I have 2 Safety Inspectors and 2 copies of Ash. And so this is a tricky one where I think some of the cards that I would have considered instead of, greeting for another Black Rose Dignitary is actually a 3rd copy of Ash. A lot of it has to depend on just like what your meta is and how many pieces of your sideboard you believe you need in order to succeed for that particular matchup, while still giving yourself a pretty rounded spread of just like generally winning any type of matchup, right? And for me, I think my biggest issue right now is that I scrub out too much on going first on Hillock, that I think an 8th Plundering Poro from the side counteracts that. And then once I am not running these anymore, maybe I'm going second, then I actually take both Plundering Poros out, and in its place, I shove back in the 3rd Black Rose Dignitary, and then your deck looks a little bit more standard again. Safety Inspector, it's definitely getting me out of a pinch quite a few times. I think the 2 matchups that are key for this is Aurelia and Aurora decks. Most of the time, if I don't happen to hit the Ash before they find, their Auroras, then these 2 Ashes are good enough. If they do happen to find it, then Safety Inspector guarantees me to at least board clear one of the Elder Dragons or whatever as soon as possible, and then that'll allow me to at least keep tempo for a little while. I can safely double conquer again without worrying about Flurry of Blades, at least for a turn. The other trick is that, we highly value cards that have some kind of death knell that will bring another unit back, so that a board clear isn't necessarily a full-on board clear. What do I mean by that? So whenever you're in that kind of matchup, you should actually be looking for Glass Mixologists. You should be looking for your Rune Heralds. And generally speaking, a lot of the other units are a little non-consequential. I would say the 3 Harness Dragons also essentially serve as a great way to do what Safety Inspector is doing, albeit the power cost is kind of high. But for Aurora matchups, I don't think you should worry too much about the power costs. You should just try your best to tempo as fast as possible and do what you need to. There are times where I can kind of tell that my opponent's Aurora is already coming soon, either because they're just ramping like crazy to immediately get it out as soon as possible. In those cases, I would actually greet it and Baited Hook and attempt to hook my LeBlanc Fragmented for 2 options. One is to get the Ash out, and then 2, if they already landed the Aurora, then to get the Safety Inspector out. I think nowadays a lot of Auroras will expect you to have some form of Gear Hate, which this deck actually doesn't have. And so if you manage to hit the Ash even after the Baited Hook has come, you still have some pretty vital targets, right? You can get rid of a Fury of Blades, you can get rid of a second Aurora that happens to be in your deck. And then, worst case scenario, if an Elder is already out, you can hook into the Safety Inspector and kill their Elder. And then if all things go well, you likely have a shittier target on the board with a decent death knell that you can actually choose in place of Safety Inspector. So like a good example is you wouldn't mind killing a Watchful Sentry or, even like Black Rose Dignitary or the Birds in place of this to get some card draw or re-ramp yourself back up after doing the Baited Hook tech. That's generally it for my deck. Feel free to ask any questions that you have. This is, once again, the cards that I am not super sure about how I feel. I think in the current meta, it feels as though Aurora is starting to ramp down in play rate. And so I did not want to dedicate something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards simply for one matchup. And so what I'm instead doing is actually trying to smooth out my curve a little bit better, which is, I think, one of the more game-breaking components of a LeBlanc Hook deck, right? Is when you have to skip turn 1, and then maybe turn 2, the only play that you have is actually to play your LeBlanc Chosen Champion unit, which ramps you down 1 more. And so this is just a way to kind of counteract that. Hopefully this video helps. I didn't want to ramble for too long. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the comments. I'll answer as soon as I can. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you soon. And I'll try my best to make more videos soon as well. Bye.